Chris Beast here. It is now 11 o'clock at night that I record this. Why did I do this to myself? So basically, I've recorded this 4 times now. Because every time I fucking record it, I don't turn my fucking mic on. My mic isn't on this recording. I should have checked. You know what? If it isn't on, we're moving on. But welcome to Call of War. Today's video we're going to be talking about Doctrines. Doctrines are a new thing in 1.5, and I'm just gonna talk about them. Right. So there are 4 types of doctrines that every country falls into: Axis, Allies, Comintern, and Pan-Asian. So Axis, you have high power units, as this handy dandy little notebook says right here. Basically meaning these guys are gonna be hitting mega hard and basically can, like, at certain rates, like 1v3 certain factions. The thing that makes Axis a little damaging, though, is that they're really expensive. They have no downsides on the cost, meaning they have to spend the full might of the cost. However, this downside isn't large, and anyone who's ever played an Axis round knows that Axis countries normally end up dominating most of the game simply due to this. Next, we have Allies. Allies is optimization. Really, no, it's just upgrade. These guys can spam unit out of every country in the game. If you're declared war on as the Allies and you don't have a standing army, and you need a standing army, you want to be the Allies because the Allies have the fastest fielding time, they have the fastest upgrading time, they have record low amounts of research, meaning they can get high level units straight off the fucking assembly line and into your enemy's face. Yeah, they move pretty slow, but that doesn't matter in a defensive war. So as the Allies, you can field units for a defense pretty damn easily. So I would say it's pretty damn hard to invade the Allies. Next we have Comintern. I think Comintern's pretty damn shit. Comintern has the issue of it doesn't have faster production speed as a quantity-based build, and that kind of hurts it. As the Russians, you have to field a massive army in order to even be on the chopping block. I'm talking number 1 through 3 of world militaries. When you see that little stat pop up, if you don't see that shit, you're playing a Comintern country wrong, because you need to be producing units 24 fucking 7, because you can't produce them when you get invaded because you don't produce very fast. Yeah, your shit's cheap, but that doesn't matter when your enemy has taken all your provinces. So, produce the entire army. You have a negative 25% upkeep cost, so you can field the largest army in the world and pay for, the 7th largest army in the world and be perfectly fine. A big thing about a Russian communist Comintern player is there's no good fucking reason for you not have a front line, second line, third line. So that way front line collapses, oh well, we start building up that third line. They attack the second line, push the third line in to just outnumber the enemy with a huge army that you can afford to field. I'm going to note, though, this all sounds great in idealism, but realistically, the lack of faster production speed means that a good Axis player will outnumber you in most situations. So you've got to be a little smart little communist. I think a good example is I'll draw from my own playthrough as Communist Russia. I rapidly conquered all of the countries surrounding me, which gave me enough provinces to start outproducing Axis countries. Like, as a communist country, you want to make sure you're playing basically a long-term game. You need to survive early game, and you need to build up an outrageously large army in order to even be up on the chopping block of endgame. Now, if I just said you need to play for the long game on the communist, on the Japanese, you're playing, or the Pan-Asian, you're playing a very different fucking game. You have characters that are built around the idea of manipulating your enemy into situations they are not optimal in. And if you're good at that, play a Pan-Asian country, you will win 100% of the time, no fucking cap. The Pan-Asian countries, Japan and fucking one of the Chinas that is Pan-Asian, you can become legitimately impossible to invade by endgame. Because you have, and I'll get more into why Japan in particular has this, but you have this movement speed, meaning when enemies attack you, you move fucking faster than them. So they're like, haha, I'm gonna go beat up them enemies. I've got the great Axis, which is arguably one of the better ideals in the game. I'm gonna pull up and look, they have negative 10% hit points. I'll just beat them. I'll destroy them. And then you pull into a terrain that they're not optimal in, and suddenly they're crying for their mothers because not only do you have more view range, so you see them first, and you can start playing your little chess game way before they even know the chess game's being played. You pull them into a terrain they can't handle, and then you beat the living shite out of them, and you force them to turn around. With the Japanese, it's a chess game. With the Russians, it's a planning game. Like the Japanese, you need to plan for the battle. The Russians, you need to plan for the war. The Allies, you want to get the enemy to invade you, and the Germans or the Axis, all around just good faction. I hope that kind of explains my opinions on these. I'm going to move into the infantry category, and what you want to be doing is each of one of these four doctrines. So we'll start with the Axis doctrine. Scrolling down, you can see that the Axis aren't treated very nicely by infantry, but you don't need to be. You are given massive benefits on your motorized infantry, and you also get mechanized a lot earlier. Now, I play a lot of Call of War. Mechanized infantry is just flat out fucking stupid as an Axis player, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but it mainly has to do with the fact that if you're producing mechanized, you might as well be producing medium tanks, and medium tanks are just going to shit on everything on the screen right now. The fact that you get really good motorized, though, use that to your advantage. You get much faster and much more damaging. Spam the motorized infantry, and you will legitimately annihilate most infantry regiments that try to get pulled against you. So we're talking, if you can get motorized infantry, like a large amount of them in an early game, you can steamroll over every other doctrine rapidly and gain massive advantages and massive amounts of territory to the point where you can afford to field more expensive tank-based armies. Um, but moving on to the next doctrine, we have Americans, or the Allies. As the Allies, you kind of get the short end of the stick when it comes to infantry. You get your bonuses and units that, I'm not going to lie, people don't really use. Paratroopers being cheaper is cool and stuff. It makes it more useful if you're, I guess if you're the Americans, like if you're playing as any allied country in Europe, this is the most useless thing to you. I guess if you're the UK, you can paratroop over. I don't know. Why would you? Horrible idea. But the commandos, I mean, I guess I get it. We're talking about that American idea of you want the enemy to attack you first, so you can do so much damage to them by fielding a giant army that's higher level, way faster than they can respond. In that situation, yeah, commandos are pretty dope. You can sit them around and do exactly that. Field a lot of high level commandos, sit them in bushes, and just gun down the enemy. Same you can do with France, UK, all the allied countries. But the issue is really, generally speaking, as a allied country, your infantry just not very good. So don't really put too much money in infantry. Just like I said with the Germans, I mean the Axis, except the Axis actually has motorized infantry. Now, the Russians, or the communists, you actually have points in infantry. Use it! I watch so many communist players who are like, no, I'm going to spam my tanks, and then their tanks fight tanks, and they get annihilated, and they don't have enough money to field any more tanks, and they're just like, why am I dying? I had so many tanks. And I'm like, you stupid idiot. You should have built infantry units. You would have been able to build 3 times more infantry units, and your infantry units are not that bad. So why their infantry units are not that bad? You get mountain bonuses and urban bonuses. Mountains, if you're playing as a communist country, you're gonna have mountains. If you're playing as the Soviet Union, you have the southern mountains, the Caucasus Mountains to your south. If you're playing as communist China, if you expand a bit, you get those mountains in the Mongolian steppes. If you're playing as Romania, you can go, I think it's north. You have the mountains that border the Russian areas of like Ukraine. You have Yaesi and Chinesu that you can build up. You have mountains. Use them. Stick your militia in those mountains and stick a lot of them in your mountains, and nobody's gonna pass. Like nobody's gonna pass through. Another country that's a communist doctrine is Turkey. Turkey, you have massive mountains in your north. Russia, as a Turkish player, is gonna be your number one enemy. Yeah, if the Russian power that wins is either the Russian Empire or Russia, they're gonna come out with a communist doctrine as well. But don't let them take those mountains because you both have the mountain bonus. Urban bonus, obvious. You should have militia in every one of your cities protecting. Unless you play a mad diplomacy game and you just don't need to. You really, in most public matches, now private matches, most of what I'm saying in this video isn't very important because it's more diplomacy based, but in private matches, you should have at least one militia in every one of your cities because you have the urban bonus. If their militia meets your militia, you're gonna win. Moving down to the Russian infantry, they get minus 15% upkeep cost, which is on top of the existing negative 25%, meaning your infantry is practically free. Why wouldn't you produce it? You actually do produce these faster and get them earlier. This is the one unit Russia is going to be like, yes, I can outproduce my enemies. Do it. There's no good reason why you don't have large chunks of militias in your mountains and urbans, and you don't have large chunks of infantry just sporadically spread through your country. Because there's no reason for you to be spending large amounts of monies on motorized and mechanized when every other country's gonna shit on them. It's just waste of cash. Moving over to Pan Asian, we now have there's one unit that's usable here, and it's infantry. Infantry is the most quintessential unit in any army, though, so it's not like the Pan Asians are really getting the shaft here. They get plus 15% hit points, plus 30% forest bonus, and they get their thing 1 to 2 days earlier. Now, here's something to note. The only Pan Asian debuff, minus 10% hit points, is fixed by their infantry. No country has an HP bonus, meaning their infantry is on par with the rest. It also has that plus 20% movement speed and plus 20% terrain bonus. So this becomes a plus 50% in forests, and they have the plus 35% range. If you're not a Asian country who utilizes this giant massive bonus you have in forests, then you're doing something wrong. A Japanese player or any player who uses the large amounts of forest found in Southeast Asia will win against other doctrines. They just will. So use it. Be intelligent. Use this bonus that you're given by the game. Alright, we're going to move on to Ordnance now, and we're going to start with the Axis Ordnance. The Axis have the weirdest fucking ordnance, but I'm I guess it's really good, but it's just weird to me. They get plus 15% damage to tanks. If I ever see your ass using an anti-air against a tank, my disappointment will be immeasurable. Yeah, sure, you get this cool little buff, and I think it's not that bad because anti-air isn't like horrible against tanks. But if they have any good leveled tank, your anti-air will die, and you just wasted a very, very vital piece in maintaining air superiority on a fucking tank. Don't be stupid. Now you get plus 15% damage to aircraft. That's where the true gem of your anti-air comes in. Axis players who are really good, and I've fought some pretty good Axis players, will stick a couple anti-air on their province borders, wait for war to start, and most countries in public rounds, when they start a war, will send their planes in to weaken. Now, I'll get into in a little bit and why I think that's really stupid, but they'll send their planes in to weaken the enemy. They'll slam straight into anti-aircraft, and their entire enemy fleet is gone. Because the Axis just have such good anti-air. I mean, yeah, every other country can also do this. Anti-air is a really good piece of weaponry I don't see used enough, to be honest. But the fact that the Axis can employ a plus 15% damage multiplier means you can just destroy enemy interceptors like they're nothing. And that's a very useful piece that I love seeing occur. Now, moving on to the Allies bonus in the Ordnance category, they get bonuses on the on the artillery in general. So they get, actually no, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. SP artillery. They get plus 15% damage to tanks, and they get plus 10% hit points. SP artillery is already arguably one of the better units in the game. Just factually speaking, when you get to endgame, a lot of people are going to be using these things because you can make sure your enemy can't retaliate while you're just damaging them. The fact these guys get a tank damage bonus is a huge, huge part. I think really if you're an allied player and you're going against an Axis player, your use of SP artillery is going to be crucial to how you win. These things can decimate the medium tanks that are going to make up the majority of an Axis army. Use them and use them intelligently. You have extra hit points so you can afford to take a couple blows if it means decimating the entirety of a tank brigade. But how you play that is up to you. Moving on to the Comintern. The Comintern did a lot of bonuses when it comes to Ordnance, but they're not great. Sure, you get a little bit of production speed increase and production cost decrease on your artillery, but it's not SP artillery, which means they're going to be really slow and really honestly phased out by endgame and in offensive wars. So use your artillery as a defensive piece. I'm see how it works out for you. Your anti-tank though is going to be the piece that you're going to need to bring together with your artillery. If you put an anti-tank on your front line and it does this plus 15 damage to both tank types. So the enemy tanks from the Axis come barreling in and you just go pew 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 with your anti-tank and they start to run away and you fire with your artillery. You can do the exact same thing the Americans didn't do. And yeah, it's a couple extra steps, but you can do the exact same thing and completely decimate an offensive tank army. Again, most players are going to be either Axis tank based armies or Allied tank based armies. Not many players in public rounds are really going to use things to their maximum. Tank based armies seem to be something that people really like. Do I understand that? No, but it's what happens. Finally, we have the Japanese. Japanese have some pretty good artillery. For a second I thought they had pretty good SP artillery too, but they don't. Regular artillery, they get plus 15% damage to regular units, and they get it for cheaper. I don't know how you could use this besides, how to use artillery, like just shell the enemy army. Um, Putting this on your front lines to help hold it. Artillery by itself is not the best piece because SP artillery really just is that much better. But it's nice the Pan Asians get this boost. So yeah, moving on. Tanks. So we're gonna first talk about the Axis tanks. Axis tanks, I've been talking about it for a lot of this video now. The medium tank. Now, if I see any of you motherfuckers running anything that isn't a medium tank, I swear, as an Axis country, not using the medium tanks is a death sentence, and it proves that you don't really understand what doctrines mean. If you were in normal Cold War and you wanted to spam your light tanks because they're cheaper, faster to produce, and you can make a lot more of them, I can understand that. But if you're in 1.5 and you're making light tanks, you're just asking to get walloped, right? You're going to be behind tech-wise, and if you're in a world map, you're going to be behind damage-wise as well. So don't do it. Pull out your plus 15% movement speed, plus 10% hit points on your medium tank, and just steam over everything. You move faster and you have more HP, so you can just shred enemy armies, shred enemy tanks, shred literally everything in your path. And there's not really much that a non-organized army, and again, I've been giving ideas on how to organize and defeat these things, but a non-organized army, which is something that exists very much in early game and even in medium game, is going to get decimated by medium tanks. And here's another example. Let's say you're a good Axis player and you punch through the front line using another tactic. If you can punch through the front line, spamming medium tanks in through the hole you made can let you rapidly take their country before they're able to respond. Even a communist country that has a second line isn't, unless they properly arm that second line with anti-tank and artillery, isn't going to be able to stop your medium tanks, and you're just going to wash over their infantry. So, something to remember. Moving on to the Allies did a really good tank destroyer. However, tank destroyers are bad. I'm literally not even going to talk anymore about this because I've never seen a situation where someone actually should be using a tank destroyer and not anti-tank, artillery, heavy tanks, or anything else that's just miles better at dealing with tanks. But we move on to the communists. The communists have a really good heavy tank. How to use this? I don't know. You guys are going to have to tell me in the comments what you think a communist country with the fact they have a really good heavy tank, what they could do with it. Heavy tanks are a little expensive to justify getting a lot of. I guess they could be used as a spearhead division to punch through enemy medium tanks, so that way you could launch an offensive. But as the Russians launch an offensive into an Axis country, it's going to be a lot harder, and basing it around heavy tanks isn't the best idea. But, I mean, it could work. It could work. I'm not really sure. Someone's going to have to give me some ideas because I don't know what you can do with this. Now, the Pan Asians get a decent amount of buffs to the tanks that actually matter, in my opinion. Well, medium tank matters, but these are the two tanks that normal people are going to be using that aren't the Axis. You're going to be getting plus 20% damage on infantry. You're going to be shredding enemy infantry. Very good for offensive in your armored cars. But the better thing is your light tank. Plus 15% damage to light and plus 15% damage to light tanks, meaning you can spam your stupid Hongo. This is a Hongo, I think. Hongos aren't good in real life. I don't know why they're so good in this game, but you can spam it across all of China and rapidly take it. And there's, like, besides, again, there's always strategy. You can anti-tank, you can artillery, you can do all that, but you can rapidly spam it across communist China and the other parts of China that aren't the Pan-Asian faction, Doctrine, and just rapidly take it because you deal so much more damage to the standard unit and the standard tank. Alright, so moving on to the air. Now, the air is an interesting situation. A lot of people have different opinions on what to do with it. I'm not going to give my entire opinion on what to do with it. I'm just going to explain how I think each advantage each country gets affects them in the air. If you want, I could do a video in the future on how I think air combat should be used as a player, but my ideas are definitely not the only truth. Starting with Axis, you guys get really good attack bombers. Uh, use these things as defensive pieces, and you'll be able to shred enemy invading armies and enemy invading tanks. And if you're able to get air superiority and deal with enemy anti-air, you're going to be able to shred their army and their tanks before they're even able to immobilize like fully against you, because this just does so much damage, and you're getting them so much earlier. Moving on to the allies, the tactical bombers, you have more attack range, which means you're going to be able to attack enemies farther behind the front lines. You could use this to completely cut any reinforcement that an enemy army is expecting off from the source, making it, I don't know, in my opinion, so that way it's easier to win the war. The communists really should stay out of the air. They get no real benefits and they're just pure neutrals. But the Pan-Asians, again, get that plus 15% attack range, but their real gem is down here. So yeah, their interceptor, you can get complete air dominance. You know, you have the extra attack range and the extra damage. I mean, if you have a couple of these patrolling around the Japanese area, or if you're one of the Chinese Pan-Asians, you can do this too. Just patrol and you'll take air dominance. Follow that air dominance up with some naval dominance by sending some of these bad boys to destroy an enemy fleet. And if you're a country like Japan or really any country, you won't be able to be navally invaded by some other countries, especially in the world maps like the United States. The United States is going to be a big issue for you, and this can just kill that. Like all dreams the United States has of invading you, you can kill very rapidly with just a couple well-placed interceptors for aerial dominance, and then a couple well-placed naval bombers for naval dominance. I mean, of course, you're going to need some aircraft carriers to actually pull that off. Now, on the naval side, each country has, like just like everything else, has one thing that's good for them. The Axis have the submarine or the Unterseeboot. They're going to be able to use these things to basically cripple anything from actually moving in an ocean. They have plus 15 movement speed, so you're really going to be able to just move these things around and wreak havoc on enemy fleets that aren't careful and aren't backed up by destroyers. The Allies, however, have a really good destroyer. So, in the, I don't really think this is indicative of who will win in the seas, but it should be understood that if we go sheerly by their bonuses, the Allies are a sheer counter to the Axis in this situation, as they're able to sink their fleets using really good destroyers. They also have the movement speed increase as well. The Russians have a better cruiser, which I guess is cool. Don't really know why this is a huge deal for the Russians. I mean, the Russians, again, are just going to be a pure neutral with a slightly better cruiser. Cool. Cruisers are okay at dealing with enemy planes, but you really shouldn't be using cruisers to gain aerial dominance. You just use interceptors on aircraft carriers. I mean, I guess if you don't want to build a capital ship aircraft carrier, then I guess cruiser fleets would work. But the Pan-Asians are the real ones that benefit the most out of any country. They have an extremely good battleship that does so much extra damage and so much extra hit points. And remember, battleships can shell land provinces. So using these bad boys, you can basically act as a mobile naval artillery platform, and you can do a lot of damage as a Pan-Asian country, which can help facilitate an invasion or help make it impossible for your enemy to attack you. And remember, this is versus all, so meaning all the other ships you see here, this also does the extra damage to. Right. So moving on to the secret category, we have the Germans. So the Axis. So the Axis did their benefits on the bombs. Well, they also did railroad guns. And I have to know 2 days of extra availability is insane. Railroad guns are something that's going to be that is just a massive part of endgame combat. Do the immense amount of damage in their huge range. The fact they get theirs 2 days early is just baffling to me. But their rockets are not horrible. Rockets are something I don't really like, but if you like rockets, they do 15% more damage, and their rocket fighters do 15% more damage to regular planes and move 15 times faster, meaning 15% faster, which means you can rapidly gain aerial supremacy. The Allies get their nukes 2 days earlier, which is, in my opinion, a really big benefit. This is going to let them hit the end game 2 days earlier than anyone, which could make or break endgame. Well, make or break a round's endgame. I don't think this is a broken feature because the Americans don't have any other buffs in any other category, and that's kind of painful since, you know, rocket artillery is a very good piece. And speaking about rocket artillery being a very good piece, the Russians. The Soviets and communist countries in general are able to get really good SP artillery, plus 15% movement speed and plus 10% damage. You can field these bad boys against enemy armies and just constantly berate them. You shell them for one movement turn, then you move away, and then you shell them again, and then you move away, and you shell them away again. And combine that with all the other stuff, such as front lines and second lines, and all the other stuff I've been saying to do as the Russians. And you can basically, this is why the communists, despite having some lackluster stats, can still do amazingly in a combat. And finally, we have the Pan-Asian buffs. They get plus 20% damage to flying bombs and minus 20% production time. I think that's a horrible buff. The fact the only buff they get is for flying bombs is kind of atrocious. But then again, they get tons of buffs elsewhere, so I guess it all balances out. That's been it for today's video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you.